So the question is then, is Automist fit for purpose? And this invariably comes to the question of, is it compliant to the standard? Does it meet the standard? And we'll now go into that. So the first important thing to note is that a standard is the definition of a scope of a product category just as much as it is the definition of or setting the performance expectation for that product category. So the usual interpretation of a standard is that it's the only allowable prescriptive way of meeting the building regulations or any other performance requirement required. And in fact, it isn't. It is a way. It is a well-established, historically established recipe. It doesn't mean that it's the only way. It is just defining that way and how you validate that that way is adequate. So, oops. So we do have for sprinkler systems BS 9252 as the standard that defines what is a Automist, what is a sprinkler system, and it requires it to be a system activated by a bulb, and it then defines what's the performance requirement. So what if you run a fire test? What are the maximum temperatures you're allowed to meet? So what's important is what are the performance requirements? Like what are you trying to achieve in terms of tenability, and not that you have to be a wet pipe, right? The wet pipe defines what a sprinkler is. Other systems can perform just like a sprinkler and not be a sprinkler and not be within the scope of the standard. So the question is not whether it is compliant with respect to Automist. The question is whether it is within the scope of it. And Automist is outside of the scope, but it does perform to the fire test requirements, and we'll get a bit more into that. So why is Automist that different, and why is there a standard, for example, for a sprinkler, but there isn't a standard for Automist? Well, or for Automist itself. So the sprinkler was invented in 1882 by Grenfell, and it was patented then. For 20 or so years, he was the only one that was allowed to manufacture it. There was no standard to it. The only reliance was on third-party testing to validate that or even specific in situ testing that the application worked for its intended purpose. And its intended purpose has always been for property protection, which is why the large factory mutual testing lab / insurer exists and is a major player in the industry today. So only after the 20 years, once the patent expired, is that there were several manufacturers making the same sprinkler system, basically copying what Grenfell had patented and developed. And only once there are 3 manufacturers of the same system is that a standard can be written by BSi. And that's what they did. They wrote a standard for sprinklers. In fact, originally that standard was written in the US, and BSi adopted the same type of standard or the same methodology of validating the sprinkler. And nowadays you have at least some 10 large manufacturers, mostly based in the US, for sprinkler systems, and they're basically a commodity. This is a very mature product. Anybody can make it as long as they run the fire tests and certificate the system to demonstrate that it does meet the standard. So it's the whole objective of a standard is that you're creating a level playing field for a consistent product in the market, so that if a buyer buys a sprinkler, they know that they are buying a sprinkler as opposed to something else that they think is a sprinkler but isn't. So it's setting the definition of what the product is and its expectation. So what we are today for Automist is the same stage that Grenfell was in 1882. We are in the patent. We have a few patents that protect our product, and we continue developing patent as we improve the product. And it means that nobody else can make our product, which also means that there's no standard available for it. So what we do instead is that we test against existing standards or against the fire tests that are present in the existing standards to demonstrate that our system is just as effective as those defined by those standards. And that's what we have, where we have fire testing that demonstrates that the system performs as intended.
I've been involved in standards for many years. I've chaired British standards, I've chaired European standards and chaired ISO standards meetings, and have been thoroughly convinced that sharing opportunities and innovation and materials is a good way to go. I think it's important to understand the life cycle of a product. In the early life cycle of a new product, it may well be patented to protect it because it's innovative and new and exciting. And later on, as that product becomes further developed, and there is further competition, the patent perhaps expires, it is right where there is similar products to compare it with that standards step in to ensure there is a level playing field alongside those products, that they can be measured and tested at outcomes together. So the life cycle in the product is important for a buyer to understand at what point they're looking to purchase product for. Buyers must find other ways to assure themselves that product is fit for purpose in meeting their requirements in the marketplace, and not rely solely on standards as the only solution.
So going back to where the standards is a definition of scope and expectation, the NFCC study in the UK says that the overall efficiency of a sprinkler is of 94%, which some might argue is very high, is very good. It is quite good if you compare to the 80% effectiveness of the compartmentation and the use of fire doors in domestic settings. But coming originally from the automotive industry, I'd say that this is a very poor effectiveness compared to other industries. And you can have the comparison to the Boeing 737 MAX, which is currently grounded, with the 2 accidents they had, compared to the 8,400 flights they would do a week. They have effectiveness which is many orders of magnitude better than a sprinkler. So the key thing, even on this same NFCC study, is that they only found 5 fatalities on the 1,300 sprinkler activations, which is a good number. However, the key thing is that all the fatalities were in the non-dwellings, which shows that sprinklers in dwellings still result in fatalities. And that's exactly where we want to address. We know that sprinklers work very well in property protection, where they're well maintained. The key thing is improving the performance of sprinklers in domestic settings, where there are, even though the NFCC promotes the use of sprinklers, there still are fatalities. So it is the least worst solution, and yes, it is the dominant and the best solution historically to date, but we do believe that there's the potential to improve it significantly. So it is one of the things that Dame Hackett criticized on the industry on her report post Grenfell, suggesting that reliance on a totally prescriptive system does not discourages ownership and accountability for decisions. So there's just the exercise of checking a box as opposed to finding whether the solution is fit for purpose, is the best solution for that specific occupant, specific type of building, specific use of that building. So if the question then comes up of, well, is even an innovative system allowed by approved document B on all the guidance, given that approved document B and BS 991, for example, state sprinklers and Automist a lot? Well, approved document B does state that innovative systems are allowed. The key thing is to determine whether they're fit for purpose. And of course, there might be the additional exercise to validate where they're fit for purpose. But our argument is that if that exercise is done properly, then there's a good chance that a better solution will be found for the occupant and the type of building than what is written today on the prescriptive guidance, given that the prescriptive guidance tends to be only historically based and therefore has the difficulty of adopting and recommending the use of innovative systems. So how do we demonstrate that it's fit for purpose then? Well, we use this three-stage approach, which is used by Zurich Insurance, and we like that approach because it's the same logic that we apply to our system. Firstly, questioning whether it will work. Second, whether it's designed right. And third, if it's in service. So defining whether it will work is what we've done of all the fire testing against the sprinkler standards and against the Automist standards, and demonstrating that it passed all the fire tests to those standards. We went beyond that and we got a register detail from LABC where there's further scrutiny that was done also by London Fire Brigade to validate that the system would also be specified correctly, that would avoid obstructions from the head given its height location. And finally, there's the BSi Verification Certificate, that is a third-party independent verification that indeed the fire test performance was met on all these test reports. Because what we have in the left is only test reports. They could be just saying, well, the system met this temperature, in effect a fail, but it doesn't tell you that. It's BSi Verification Certificate that instead looks into more detail into the handbook and and compares the test reports to the standard to validate, in fact, that it has met that performance requirement. We're also in the process of getting the system certified. There is no certification today possible as part of in the UK. The BRE, which will be the only UCAS lab for certification of suppression systems, does not yet have a domestic standard LPS published. So there are no domestic and residential Automist systems certified in the UK. And if you're told that it's certified, then that's mis-selling. What there could be is third-party assessed systems, like through the registered detail process through LABC. So instead, we have gone to UL, which is the largest fire safety lab in the world and based in Chicago in the US. And they're applying over 20 different standards selectively to our system to get it certified. And we expect to have that completed by the end of this year. So this is a full system certification. And it took us even 3 years just to come to agree on the test plan of how comprehensive and complex this has been. And the additional point to make is that in approximately 2 years, we should have the publication of EN 14972, which would supersede BS 8458. And when this EN standard is published and when harmonized, then that would mean that certification would be mandatory. So this might happen in the next 2 years, in fact. So is it designed right? Well, a lot of what the purpose of a suppression standard is to define how it is correctly specified. Given the Automist is not a wet pipe system fitted onto the ceiling, there is a whole handbook, a whole DIOM, so design, installation, operation, and maintenance handbook, that explains how the system should be specified. And we make that as controlled and as frictionless as possible, so that this is properly done by every accredited installer that Plumis retains, audits, and trains. And you can see how we do that, for example, by our use of our web-based software tool, which defines the rooms that need protecting, and then locate the doors and windows of the room, which are important for the location of our heads, and then define the presence of where the spray heads should be located. So, and therefore confirms whether the suppression system is addressing every area within that room so that it is properly covered. So this is a tool that every Automist installer uses, and it simply captures all the rules that were defined as part of the register detail process and is documented also on our handbook. They're all captured in this tool and automatically applied to tell you, yes, you can in fact place the head in these locations so that they are providing the adequate coverage as part of our guidance. So is it serviced correctly? Well, Automist is the only suppression system that in fact has the commissioning process is a full test of the system from the first point of detection until the final point of water discharge. So we do discharge every spray head as part of the commissioning system in situ once it's been installed to confirm that the system will be working as intended once there is a fire. And curiously, this is never done by any wet pipe system. The pump is installed, the piping installed, the nozzle are installed, and then the fingers are crossed to hope that it will work as intended. And this is, again, one of the sources of the lower reliability of wet pipe systems. They should be ideally tested to ensure that there isn't like a rat in the main pipe feed that would stop the system from working. And finally, every spray head of ours comes with a label on every head so that the homeowner or the occupant to that property can register the system, can understand how it works, given that it's clearly present in the room and it's visible to the occupant frequently, given that it's usually located close to light switches, so it's always present and telling the occupant that it's there. That once the system is registered, then there's an automatic reminder for them to do their yearly service of the system, which we recommend, but it's not mandated. There's no reason why the system would not work years after it's been installed. Given that it's a dry pipe system, so there's no risk of mold building up or the pump getting stuck because it needs to be churned. None of these requirements that are typical to a sprinkler applies to our system. All that's done is a check of whether the system is basically being tampered with and that it will work as intended.